Infinite Warfare presents UNSA as the good side, and the SDF as the enemy. But that framing falls apart if you look at it directly. The story is told entirely from UNSA's perspective, so their actions are treated as normal and justified by default. That doesn't mean they actually are. UNSA controls Earth and most of the solar system. They have the infrastructure, the military dominance, and the authority to define what order means. That is not moralistic. That is power. When a single system controls everything and calls it stability, that is effectively an empire, even if it doesn't label itself that way. The game avoids showing how that control affects outer colonies like Mars, but the existence of the SDF already implies that something went wrong. You don't get a militarized breakaway faction like that unless there was pressure, exploitation, or abandonment. Settlement Defense Front, the SDF, is framed as extremist, and they are. They commit mass violence and operate with rigid, brutal ideology. But those traits don't come out of nowhere. Mars is harsh, resource-limited, and isolated. A society built under those conditions, especially in opposition to a dominant power like United Nations Space Alliance, the UNSA, would logically become hardened, militaristic, and intolerant of weakness. Their extremism is a result of environment and conflict, not random evil. They didn't start that way, they ended that way. That still doesn't excuse what they do. Killing civilians and waging total war is not justified, but it does mean their behavior has a cause. If UNSA created or maintained conditions that forced Mars into isolation or dependency, then the SDF is a predictable outcome. In that sense, UNSA didn't just fight an enemy, they helped create one. Nick Reyes represents the core of the problem. He is not malicious. He believes he is doing the right thing. He protects his crew and follows his duty, but he never questions the system he is fighting for. He assumes UNSA is legitimate because he exists inside it. That makes him an enforcer of its power, not an objective, moral, reliable source of information. From Earth's perspective, he's a hero. From Mars's perspective, he's part of the force that kept them under control. Call of Duty Infinite Warfare can be read as the Spec Ops the line of its franchise, not because it openly critiques the player, but because it accidentally contains the same structure of moral self-deception, just without calling attention to it. At its core, Infinite Warfare still runs on the same foundation. You are given authority, a mission, and a clear enemy. From that point forward, everything you do is framed as necessary. You destroy ships, kill hundreds or thousands of enemy soldiers, and carry out large-scale retaliation strikes, all without ever being asked to question whether the war itself is justified. Like Walker, Reyes doesn't wake up one day and decide to do something evil. He makes consistent, reasonable decisions within the system he's placed in. Every action is justified as survival, defense, or duty. The difference is that the game never challenges that justification. This is where the Spec Ops comparison becomes sharp. Walker believes he is helping Dubai while actively making it worse. Reyes believes he is protecting humanity while potentially reinforcing a system that created the conflict in the first place. In both cases, the protagonist is not malicious. He is operating under moral certainty. That certainty is the problem. You could even argue that Nick Reyes is actually even worse than we think. Before the SDF attacks Geneva, if you strip away the framing that paints Reyes as the reasonable soldier, this scene can be read very differently.
SETDEF's made no demands.
Settlement Defense Front doesn't make demands. They planted a flag in our rock. They executed 3 men and shot down a pilot.
Our team was sent to secure classified weapons from a closed facility.
That facility is a black site, Admiral. Why the hell is SETDEF allowed in that airspace?
By permission of the Accords, all nations have access to
Sir, that objective required a full strike force, not a 4-man team.
Lieutenant Reyes, I implore you to use diplomacy in this office. Take a different tact.
Yes, sir. Who else knows about this?
Right now, Joint Strategic Air Command and you.
This is a deliberate act of aggression, Admiral. We should be out there on patrol, not down here throwing confetti.
The rules of engagement prohibit definitive action under these circumstances.
So we stand by with our barrels in the sand and we watch a Fleet Week parade?
Lieutenant Reyes, make no mistake. My instincts, which are aligned indelibly with your own, are that we need to engage.
Reyes is not asking whether war is necessary. He has already decided it is. In this scene, Nick Reyes can be read not as a reasonable officer urging caution, but as someone already operating on a rigid fascist mindset. He does not approach the situation as something to investigate or interpret. He treats it as settled. The SDF's actions are immediately defined as deliberate aggression, and from that point on, everything else becomes irrelevant. There is no uncertainty in his thinking. He has already decided what the situation means and what the response should be. Reyes is not asking if escalation is necessary. He is arguing that it is overdue. When Admiral Raines brings up the accords, shared airspace, and rules of engagement, Reyes dismisses them outright. He interrupts, challenges their validity, and reframes the issue as a failure of authority. This is not just frustration. It is a rejection of the system that is supposed to regulate conflict. Legal frameworks and diplomacy are treated as obstacles, not safeguards. His language makes this clear. He does not say, "we should prepare." He says, "we should be out there on patrol." He does not frame war as a possibility. He frames it as something that is already happening and being ignored. In his view, hesitation is not caution, it is weakness. That belief is reinforced when he repeats the doctrine drilled into him. Hesitation is a hole in the head. The most revealing part of the exchange is what he ignores. Raines explicitly states that the UNSA team was sent to secure classified weapons from a black site. That detail suggests escalation already exists on UNSA's side. Reyes does not question it. He does not ask why such a facility was there or how it might be perceived by Mars. Instead, he asks why the SDF is allowed in that airspace. This shows a clear bias. UNSA presence is assumed to be legitimate, while SDF presence is treated as intrusion. That is not neutral thinking. Reyes also aligns himself with a broader mindset that places military judgment above civilian control. When Raines explains that politicians are holding back escalation, Reyes pushes against it. His argument is simple. By the time politicians decide to act, it will be too late. The implication is that they should not be the ones deciding at all. He sees diplomacy as delay and governance as interference. The people who want restraint are, in his view, the problem. What makes this read as ideological zealotry is not aggression or emotion, it is certainty. Reyes does not doubt himself. The logic is closed, the enemy acted, therefore war is justified. Bluntly, he is not reacting to the situation, he is imposing a framework onto it. That framework assumes conflict is inevitable and that decisive violence is the correct response. Nick Reyes is the fascist embodiment of extremism. Now let's get back into the Spec Ops comparison. The illusion of choice also exists in Infinite Warfare, just in a quieter form. The campaign gives you optional missions, a sense of autonomy, and the ability to choose targets. But all paths lead to the same outcome: continued escalation and total commitment to UNSA's war effort. You are never given the option to question the war, defect, or stop. Like Spec Ops, the structure is linear underneath the illusion. You are not deciding whether to fight. You are only deciding how efficiently to do it. That is not real agency. That is controlled participation. The hero-soldier fantasy is also present. But if you strip away the framing, it collapses the same way it does in Spec Ops. Reyes is portrayed as a noble leader making sacrifices for his crew. And that part is true, on a personal level. But strategically, he is still an officer executing the objectives of a dominant power. He is not saving a broken world. He is fighting to preserve an existing system. If that system is flawed or oppressive, then his heroism becomes conditional. Like Walker, he is not fixing the situation. He is deepening it, even if unintentionally. Reyes does not visibly unravel the way Walker does, but that doesn't mean the psychological mechanism isn't there. It's just controlled. The tone of the game keeps everything stable, disciplined, and emotionally contained, very similar to how military institutions train soldiers to compartmentalize. Instead of madness, you get normalization. The violence doesn't break Reyes. It becomes routine. That is arguably more unsettling because nothing interrupts the belief that what he's doing is right. Responsibility is the clearest overlap. Spec Ops forces the player to confront it. Infinite Warfare avoids it, but the question still exists. Who is responsible for the war? The SDF for their attacks, or UNSA for the system that led to their creation? More importantly, who is responsible for the destruction you cause as the player? The game implies the answer is the enemy, but that's a narrative convenience. In reality, you are still the one carrying out the actions. Like Spec Ops, the structure depends on you continuing forward without stopping to question it. The biggest difference is that Spec Ops turns on the player and says, "This is your fault." Infinite Warfare never says that. It keeps you comfortable. But if you apply the same lens, the critique is still there. You are still participating in large-scale violence because the game told you it was justified. You still accept the mission, follow orders, and push forward without resistance. The only difference is that Infinite Warfare doesn't break the illusion for you. Bluntly, Infinite Warfare functions as a softer version of Spec Ops, The Line. It has the same underlying themes: authority, obedience, justified violence, and moral self-deception, but it doesn't expose them. It leaves them buried under the surface. If you choose to look at it critically, the result is the same. You are not just playing a hero, you are playing someone who believes he is right while doing things that may not be. Now, this scene is the perfect example of Nick Reyes' fascist ideology. He just reframed his language to depict his viewpoint as the right one.
The needs of our planet were greater than she could supply. So we went beyond the reaches of our atmosphere. The new frontier offered the promise of a new beginning. But the distance gave way to a movement with no connection to the place we call home. New rules, new ambitions, a new enemy. The Settlement Defense Front built an army and broke away from the Earth with blood and violence. They aren't revolutionaries. They want absolute power. They raid colonies, take resources, and control territories by force. They use their fleet to block us from raw materials we need to survive. Their mission is to erase everything Earthborn. Today, the SDF is a war machine, ruled by its military. If a leader united that force, they would mobilize and try to take our homeland.
Reyes' speech presents itself as a neutral summary of the conflict, but it is not neutral. It is structured as justification. Every part of it is framed to establish Earth as necessary, rational, and endangered, while defining the SDF as illegitimate and inherently hostile. The bias is not subtle. It is built into the language. The opening line sets the foundation. The needs of our planet were greater than she could supply. This frames expansion as unavoidable. Earth did not choose to expand. It had to. That removes responsibility. Expansion is presented as survival, not policy. From there, space becomes a new frontier and a new beginning, which frames colonization as hopeful and constructive rather than invasive or controlling. This is standard imperial language. Growth is framed as opportunity, not domination. Then comes the shift. The distance gave way to a movement with no connection with the place we call home. This is where the SDF is introduced as a deviation. They are defined first by what they are not. No connection, no loyalty, no shared identity. This strips them of legitimacy before they are even described. They are no longer another society. They are something that broke away from what is assumed to be the rightful center. The next lines escalate that framing. New rules, new ambitions, a new enemy. The word enemy appears before any explanation of conflict. The SDF is labeled as such before their motives are examined. Then comes the key claim. They broke away from Earth with blood and violence. That may be true, but it is presented without context. There is no mention of why they broke away, what conditions led to it, or what Earth's role was in that separation. Violence is shown as originating from the SDF alone, which simplifies the conflict into aggressor versus victim. Reyes then makes a direct ideological statement. They aren't revolutionaries. They want absolute power. This is not analysis. It is dismissal. By denying them the label of revolutionaries, he denies the possibility that they are reacting to oppression or imbalance. He replaces that with a claim of pure ambition. This removes any political or historical cause and reduces the SDF to a power-seeking entity. It is a way of saying they are not responding to anything. They are just dangerous. It also comes off incredibly blind. The point of rebellions, to incite a change in leadership. Revolution, by its own definition, is to gain power for the oppressed. That is the point. But Reyes is being delusional in his framing because he depicts the SDF as being power-hungry for sake of being it. I doubt that is true. He is incapable of seeing their perspective due to his rigid mindset. The description that follows reinforces this. Raids, resource control, territorial force. All of this may be accurate, but it is one-sided. There is no acknowledgement that Earth may also control resources, territories, or access to materials. The line, "They use their fleet to block us from raw materials we need to survive," is especially revealing. It frames Earth as dependent and the SDF as obstructive, but it avoids the obvious question. Why does Earth rely on resources that are outside its own planet? If Earth expanded outward to secure those resources, then control over them is already contested. The SDF blocking access can just as easily be interpreted as reclaiming or defending those resources. The most extreme line is, their mission is to erase everything Earth-born. This is totalizing language. It defines the SDF not as a political opponent, but as an existential threat. Once an enemy is framed this way, any response becomes justified. If they want total destruction, then total war becomes reasonable. This is how escalation is normalized. The rest of the speech continues this pattern. The SDF is described as a war machine ruled by its military. But isn't UNSA the same thing? The hypocrisy is very striking here. It ignores the fact that UNSA itself is a heavily militarized structure projecting power across the solar system. The difference is not that one side uses force and the other does not. The difference is that one side's force is normalized and the other's is labeled as evil. Stripped of its framing, the speech means something simpler. Earth expanded beyond its planet to secure resources it could no longer produce. That expansion created distant colonies with different conditions and interests. Over time, at least one of those regions, Mars, separated and built its own system, likely under pressure, scarcity, or disagreement with Earth's control. That breakaway society became militarized, either out of necessity or ideology, and now competes with Earth for resources and influence. Both sides use force to maintain their position. From that perspective, the SDF is not automatically justified in its actions. especially its violence against civilians. But it is understandable. A society that breaks away from a dominant power, especially in a resource-scarce environment, will likely become rigid, defensive, and aggressive. Blocking Earth from resources is not random hostility, it is leverage. Raiding and territorial control are not unique behaviors. They are standard practices in a conflict over supply and survival. Bluntly, Reyes's speech is propaganda. It presents Earth's expansion as necessary, erases any responsibility for the conditions that led to the SDF's rise, and frames the enemy as irrational and absolute. What it actually describes is a power struggle between a dominant system trying to maintain access and a breakaway system trying to assert control. The SDF is not purely justified, but it is not baseless either. It is the predictable result of a system where one side expanded and the other refused to remain subordinate. Nick Reyes isn't a cartoon villain. That's the point. He's disciplined, loyal, and believes in what he's doing. He protects his people. He follows his orders. He does exactly what a soldier is supposed to do. And that's what makes him dangerous under the wrong system. Because Reyes never questions the system. He never asks why Earth controls the solar system. He never asks what Mars went through to become the SDF. He never questions whether the war itself was avoidable. He sees a threat, and he responds. And every response feels justified. That's how it works. Not evil, not chaos, not insanity, just certainty. The certainty that you're right. The certainty that action is necessary. The certainty that hesitation is weakness. Reyes isn't a monster because of what he does. He's a monster because of how he thinks. Then everything he does isn't saving the world. It's maintaining it. And that's the uncomfortable truth Infinite Warfare never says out loud. You're not just playing a hero. You're playing someone who believes he is one.